Sir, the possibility of successfully navigating an asteroid field is approximately 3,720 to 1.
Never tell me the odds.
Hello, this is No, and I believe that if you take cranberries and stew them like applesauce, they taste much more like prunes than rhubarb does. Welcome to the After Effects Kickstart podcast.
This is the first of the History of Motion Graphics podcasts that Joey and I will be doing. I'm really excited about this series, and I hope that all of you are really going to get something good out of this. Before we start today's episode, I just need to explain how this is all going to work, okay? So each week, Joey and I are going to be talking about a series of classic, quote-unquote, historical motion graphics pieces that chronologically run from 1995, up to about the recent present. And we'll be using those as the basis for a larger discussion about the history of the industry, the craft of motion design, and definitely the technological advances that made it all possible. It would definitely be helpful, therefore, for you to watch the pieces first before listening to the discussions. They're all laid out for you on the PDF, just so you know what the heck we're talking about and you can kind of picture in your head what we're discussing, okay? So, generally speaking, Joey will be taking on the role of the tech nerd, and I'll be taking on the role of the art nerd, but we'll mix it up and both of us will definitely weigh in on all the subjects. I'm hoping this is a really fun, informative discussion, and not just listening to two old men wax nostalgic about things that happened 20 years ago. In any case, episode 1 is really fun. We start right at the beginning, what I'm calling the early experimental phase, and take a nice trip back through all the old technology, through the ancient versions of After Effects, and definitely get into some of our early favorite work. So enjoy! We are here talking with Joey Kornman, and we're going to have an awesome time talking about the history of MoGraph. Let's jump into it and talk about the year of 1995. This is the year that we're going to start this history at because two important things happened that year. One, Adobe released their first version of After Effects, version 3.0, after buying it from Aldis, I believe, who bought it from Kosa or something. And the other thing that happened in 1995 that's really important is that a seminal title sequence came out, which is the 7 titles by Kyle Cooper. This is kind of largely credited to being the first modern motion graphics piece in some sense. Would you say that's true, Joey?
Absolutely. It was probably the first piece that came on my radar, although 1995, I was only 14, so I'm not sure I could have actually gotten into C7 without like my parents or something. But it's funny, you mentioned the early days of After Effects, and I'd like to point out to the students that the first version of After Effects actually wasn't called After Effects. It was Kosa, and then it had some other name that like is lost to history. But essentially, the only capabilities it had are the capabilities that the students have learned so far. Like you could make some layers and you could move them around, and that was about it. And by the way, just like a quick note for the students too, Adobe After Effects has an amazing Wikipedia page with the code name that the developers used for each version. And just so you know, it's an interesting bit of trivia. The first version was codename Egg. There you go. For what it's worth.
I love that After Effects wiki page.
But I thought
so
I thought the 7 titles when they came out, they blew everyone's mind, even if you weren't really into motion graphics.
Yeah, and they still look incredibly modern today, which is not necessarily the case from all these early motion graphics pieces. I mean, really, Kyle Cooper basically set the template here for every horror movie title sequence that's been done since, basically. I mean, I was just looking at the Walking Dead titles, and it's got the same exact rhythm, which is this kind of slow, fast, slow kind of shock thing with close-ups. I mean, he really, this has been the style of every horror film basically since. Not that this is technically a horror film, but it had that kind of titles. And, I think part of it, which is so genius, was Kyle Cooper's decision to make the titles look as if they were made by the killer himself, right? We're sort of like in the head of the killer, scratching at this film and kind of seeing the violence that's going on inside of his head. And that's just an amazing conceptual leap, I think, to have come up with. Because Kyle had done titles before. He was working at RGA, and he did some pretty notable title sequences even for like Dead Presidents and a bunch of big movies. But this is the one that really changed everything for him. And after this, he started Imaginary Forces, I believe, kind of basically off the success of this as well. Now,
we should point out, and this is probably more of a Joey thing, but none of this was actually done in After Effects.
Right. And I want to just take a minute just to pay respects to Kyle Cooper. If you have never heard that name before, he's kind of one of the godfather of motion design in a lot of respects. And go look at his IMDb page. I mean, he's been involved with some of the best title sequences that have ever been produced. But, in terms of so my role in this conversation, what I'm going to attempt to do is try to place these pieces of work in kind of a technical perspective. So those 7 titles were almost certainly not done on After Effects, because at the time, After Effects was only 2 years old.
Right.
However, here's the interesting thing. Even though After Effects was only 2 years old, and I think by that time it probably had, more features. I think, you were able to import Photoshop files, and you could have alpha channels, transparency and things like that. The code name was Nim Chow, and it was actually owned by Adobe at that point. It had, just bare bone functionality, probably though, could have still pulled that title sequence off. And that's the point I would make to everyone listening, is that those titles are amazing, not because there was some really fancy technology used.
Absolutely.
What was amazing about them was the mood. And, and there's a lot of things, the soundtrack and the sound design. You mentioned it influenced like every modern horror movie open. There's a show called American Horror Story that has a very similar, especially the sound design, with like these weird creaks and things like that. And so Kyle Cooper was sort of involved in all of that, but the aesthetic of it, I think it's interesting because at that time, there were limitations to what you could do. If you wanted to do animation from scratch and build things from scratch, it was incredibly expensive, incredibly time consuming. So in those days, it was far more common to shoot elements in camera. Those scratchy white titles were most likely shot in camera and then manipulated and composited in post, right?
Absolutely.
And nowadays you would just make them in Photoshop, or something like that. You'd use a Cintiq and do it. But back then, a lot of that stuff was still shot practically, and that gave it that grungy analog feel.
Absolutely. No. And I think that's a really important thing to stress here, is that he was actually drawing on older traditions than what we are drawing on today when we do work. He's drawing on kind of experimental filmmaking from the 60s, in which they scratched up the film and ran it through projectors until it got all messed up and projected it backwards. And they did this whole big thing with optical printing, which I don't even think if that's like around today. I'm not even sure if people do optical printing anymore, but it's basically like you're shooting one piece of film frame at a time onto another piece of film, basically like from one projector to another, kind of essentially, and then you can put effects on that. And so then they would do things like slow down the film just a little bit in one projector while the other one was recording and things like that, just to get these basically analog effects that had been around forever. And so he was kind of able to draw on a very rich history of design, because he actually studied design with Paul Rand at Yale, if you Google right now Paul Rand logos, you'll see oh my goodness, it's like AT&T and ABC and Ford and IBM and UPS. And basically between Saul Bass, who's another seminal figure in the history of motion graphics, who you should also look up because he did all of Alfred Hitchcock's title sequences, for example. But Paul Rand and Saul Bass are kind of the two most famous mid-century graphic designers that really kind of cemented the look of American graphic design. So Kyle Cooper studied with Paul Rand at Yale and was able to he's like the painter that studied, how to paint realistically and then became an abstract painter. He's like the perfect person to have done this, because he bridges the gap between the old school tech and what's coming up in the future. And somehow he's pointing to what's coming up in the future in this amazing prescient title sequence. Just
He's
amazing.
A genius, totally genius. Yeah. I imagine that those titles, they look analog. All of those effects that they did, there's several shots where they did exactly what you said. They kind of have two copies of the shot and they're slightly offset, and it gives this weird, almost like you're drunk effect. And I'm assuming that they probably did a lot of that stuff in, there's a lot of older legacy compositing programs. One of them that was very popular is called a Flame, and then it had a big brother called an Inferno. We'll talk a little bit more about those when we get into some of the later projects. But one of the things there's two things I want the students to recognize about this piece. So one is it feels very grungy and very analog. And the truth is, it's actually kind of tricky to get that look in After Effects. And because After Effects is a computer program, it makes things perfect. But if you shoot something optically, if you scratch it into film by hand with a pin or something, it's not perfect. And that aesthetic, it kind of went away for a little while, and then it came back because people realized it looked so good. And a lot of things that animators and compositors do nowadays in After Effects is try to make things look like the 7 titles, but using the flexibility of After Effects to do that. And that's that's really fun kind of dichotomy. But the other thing, this is probably the most important thing, and it's kind of silly to say in a class that is, ostensibly teaching you After Effects. But this title sequence, more than any that we're going to talk about, I think it really proves to you that it's not about the software at all. You could have made the 7 title sequence with 0 computers. You could have literally done it the old way. You mentioned optical printing, which that was before my time, but I've read about it, and you cannot imagine a more expensive, labor-intensive, error-prone way of doing title sequences, but that's the way they were done.
Right.
And so, when you learn After Effects, and a lot of people taking this class, I'm sure this is their first foray into it, they're gonna learn After Effects. They're gonna be kind of mad with power once they realize what it can do, and it's easy. And I fell into this trap when I learned it. It's easy to fall into the trap of, well, you can do anything with it. So all I need to do is get really good at this tool, and you forget that the tool is just the hammer. You can't build a house with a hammer and no blueprint. You still need to think about the music and the concept and the design, all of those things.
Absolutely. Hear. Thank you for bringing that up. That's such an important point to stress, I think, right now at the beginning of everybody's motion graphics careers here, which is that, you can, Joey and I talk about this a bunch, but really good animation will not save really bad design. And whereas mediocre animation could make a really well-designed piece look kind of awesome. So, while we know that you guys are not taking this class necessarily to become designers because you're really interested in learning animation, we want to talk about design because we recognize how important it is to this whole process and how design and animation just fit together like peanut butter and chocolate. They're two sides. When we're talking about motion graphics, they're two sides of the same thing, basically. Sure,
and I would say too, like the more modern name for motion graphics is motion design. I think by the time some of you are listening to this, you may not even hear the term motion graphics anymore, because motion design, I think, is more accurate, because it really is. It's two sides of the same coin. You've got animation, you've got design. One without the other doesn't do what we need it to do.
Yes. And many other things as well. This, like we said, this has a perfectly suited score. So that's one thing, motion graphics in general is kind of this medium where you can bring in music, you can bring in art. It's sort of a collage medium to some degree, which especially we'll see in a couple of the next pieces. But, this has perfect editing. It has perfect music. It's also, the first film of a director who would go on to establish himself as this highly aesthetic director. So I assume David Fincher played a large role in this as well. And, I just think it was a kind of a perfect storm of things coming together. But yeah, I think at heart, the concept is more important than the actual execution to some degree or other.
Totally.
What makes it great.
Totally. Yeah, it holds up. It holds up for sure. So now, so we're 1995, and now we're going to fast forward. It's funny. This is actually like my high school years, 95, 99, Joey graduates high school. And all of a sudden,
no comment about Noel. Noel was in grad school at that point.
Noel has better hair than me, though. Okay, so Noel, what are we talking about next? Where are we going after this?
Okay, so we're going to talk about a music video by a British art collective named Shinola for a group called Uncle, which I believe is DJ Shadow's first group. And the video is for a song called Guns Blazing. And this isn't necessarily a seminal work like Seven or some of the other pieces we're going to talk about, but I think it's a really good representative work of the kind of thing that people were doing with motion graphics and After Effects in 1999. Now, these guys at Shinola, they were lucky enough and they were ahead of the curve enough that they actually studied some computer animation and hand animation at school. So they already were familiar with CG animation a little bit. So they were able to pick up After Effects right away. Now, in this piece, they're kind of using it more as a compositing piece, and they're just throwing the kitchen sink at it. But again, I think this really shows this kind of scattershot experimental phase that we were in the late 1990s. there wasn't an established motion graphics style yet. Let's just say that. And people from all disciplines were approaching this. Filmmakers and computer people and designers, and they were all bringing their own aesthetics. And also, I mean, Joey can talk about this more, but they were up against the limitations of what they could literally do with the program at this point. So,
Totally.
That's an important part of what makes this aesthetic.
Sure. All right. So we're in 1999. And I'm looking up the code name for After Effects at that point. There were 2 releases. One was E-Beer and one was Batnip. And we skipped over Dancing Monkey in 1997. So, all right. So at this point, After Effects finally got 3D layers. Now, 3D layers, you probably haven't gotten to that feature yet in the class, but it essentially lets you move your layers not just up, down, left, right, but also forward and backward. And you can add a camera and move the camera around. It changes your whole scene. It turns After Effects into sort of a faux 3D app. And they added this feature, and so you can kind of see some of this. You'll see these things where things look like they're kind of moving around in 3D, but they're still really flat. And it was really interesting to me to go back and watch this piece, because I think when I saw it originally, I didn't see it in 99, but I saw it, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 years later. And when I saw it at the time, I thought, that is amazing. How did they do that? And now it doesn't really hold up. It's amazing.
I feel like I could do this piece now, kind of.
Well, yeah. I mean, by the end of the class, every single person listening is going to be able to do that piece. But at the time, it was groundbreaking. So you sort of had 3D layers. You could kind of move things around. But what's interesting is, so nowadays in motion design, it's really clear what it takes to make a good piece. It's good design. It's good animation. Back in those days, it wasn't so clear, right? I think there really was this idea that you could be a quote After Effects artist and be great with After Effects and a wizard with After Effects, and that's all it took.
And that's all you needed, absolutely.
And that's all you needed. And now this piece has some good design in it. It's got some interesting, it doesn't have animation the way you think of animation, but some of the things they're doing are really good. The way they're drawing your eye and tracing it across the frame and things like that. But what's interesting is that at that time, if you were a good animator, someone who actually understood animation and could animate well, you were not using After Effects. You were most likely, in 99, probably still drawing. Drawing frame by frame or transitioning it to CG, because that's when it really started to take off.
Right. And we see both of those things at play in this video itself. I mean, they're doing hand-drawn stuff. And, some of that was what seemed really amazing. I still think the transition with the space shuttles, though, where they blast into a million different directions is kind of MoGraphy. That's the big moment that I really took note of that particular moment. It seemed like it pointed ahead to the future a little bit. Wow.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned they threw the kitchen sink at it. I mean, that's exactly what they did. It's kind of like, let's blink this thing on and off, and let's use this effect, and then let's invert everything, and then let's move this thing over and scale this thing up. And they did it in a way that, you can tell that they had a really good eye for design and composition and pacing and things like that. They managed to make something fairly watchable. But there was no smooth, buttery, you go look at work now by Oddfellows or Giant Ant or Vuko, and it's so smooth and buttery, and the animation is just so finessed, and the design is spot on. And this had none of that. This was essentially if someone made this now, and no disrespect to Shinola, I mean they were I worshipped them back in the day. But this now is YouTube tutorial quality. I mean, this is kind of it's amazing how far it's come. Some other just interesting notes about After Effects at this time. One of the high horse I always like to get on is animation. That's kind of my thing. And the way you do it in After Effects or any animation program is with a graph. You use an animation curve editor, and that didn't exist in After Effects at the time. So even if they wanted to have nice, smooth animation and tweak it and have follow through, there really wasn't a good way to do that anyway.
Yeah, it's true.
And the other thing too, we talked about it a little bit with 7, was that when the 7 titles came out, everything was still kind of shot in camera and then composited. It wasn't there wasn't a
created
lot. There wasn't a lot like created digitally. I mean, you look at the stuff Saul Bass did, like even that stuff was shot practically, even though it kind of looks like it was,
right. You stop motion to move the graphics around.
Exactly.
Like
he was cutting things out and putting it on a table. And so I think that mentality still existed, where there was still the idea that you have layers of things, and it's the way you layer them that creates the final effect. Right. And so that guns blazing piece, it's layers and layers and layers and more layers. And it's just done in a way that would be very painful to do analog. To actually use like a reel-to-reel tape deck or some old school technology to do it would take months. But in After Effects, you probably do that in a week. Just like tons and tons of keyframes, and there you go.
Yeah, right. I really feel like with this piece that they're maximizing what they're able to do. And that's, I think that's like a really fun thing to see in a piece and to recognize about a piece. They are, like we said, they're throwing the kitchen sink at this, and they're doing it on purpose. And I just feel like it also shows like a certain enthusiasm too at that time for like, this was new, this was cool, let's like experiment with this crazy new thing, And just from a technical point of view, I can't believe there wasn't a RAM preview in After Effects when this video was made. How is that even possible? It says in 1999 RAM preview comes in. What did we just render everything and then look at the render and then get back into After Effects?
Yeah, well, it's if you had used animation software. Okay, so I was a huge dork in middle school and high school. Exactly. Thank you, Noel. Thank you. I threw you softball and you teed off. So I am a huge dork, but I was even back then. And so I was playing around with animation software when I was 12. I was pirating 3D Studio Max and all that stuff.
Wow.
And even there was even 2D animation software before After Effects. I don't remember the name of it, but there the idea that you could just hit play or hit a button and then 30 seconds later watch it in real time, that didn't exist. It was either it could play it in real time or it couldn't. And if it couldn't, you had to render it.
Right.
So the concept of a RAM preview, it seems so obvious now, probably wasn't obvious back then,
Gosh.
Yeah.
It seems so long. I mean, I can't believe that we didn't have that. It just seems like that's been with After Effects forever. I'm just surprised when I saw that, And exactly, even the things that they put in first, that they had 2-point motion tracking before they had a RAM preview. I mean, that's just backwards. What the heck were they thinking?
Well, but it makes sense if you think about it. And this brings up another interesting point about this time. So I think the 2-point tracking thing is indicative of the mentality, which is, we're going to give this artist assets to composite, and they're going to need to combine them in interesting ways to create motion graphics, not they're going to use shape layers and slick animation and good design to make something beautiful. That idea just didn't really exist in motion design.
You're right.
In traditional animation, of course, it did, and it took years for it to make its way over.
Right, so, and this had already kind of hit desktop publishing already by this point, too, because, that digital revolution. Here's a pop quiz for you, Joey. Which product came first, Illustrator or Photoshop?
That's a good question. I would guess Photoshop.
Yeah, that's what I would have guessed too, but I just looked this up and it's wrong. Illustrator came out 3 years before Photoshop. Isn't that surprising? I had no idea.
Wow.
Yeah, Photoshop 1989. Illustrator is 85, 86. Did I say 89? I said 89, right? Okay.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. I know, it would have seemed because I was thinking, okay, when they built After Effects, they basically were all right, we have Photoshop and we're going to sort of start with Photoshop and then layer in these things. And you could see early on they're bringing in transfer modes and stuff like that from Photoshop. But yeah, the shape layers and vector stuff didn't come till much later in the After Effects development in any case.
Yeah, exactly. And that all came over from Illustrator. So so what I wanted to say was that in that era, in right at the turn of the century, sounds weird to say that. After Effects was still seen in the industry to ad agencies and clients as a toy. It was not seen as a serious piece of software to be used on high-end jobs. Right. And so the software that was used, that I was exposed to, was a product that it's now owned by Autodesk. It used to be owned by Silicon Graphics. And it's called Flame. And there's a few versions of it. There's a version called Inferno, which I think costs more money. There was Flint for a while. There was different iterations of it. Smoke was their editing app, but it could do some compositing. It was very confusing. But a Flame back in 1999 would probably run you $200,000 to $500,000. It was a turnkey system. You had to buy the whole thing from them. The drives, the computer, the monitors, everything came together. It required special hard drives. You couldn't just buy your own. If you wanted to network two of them together, you had to buy their thing, which was $30,000 or something.
Right.
Plugins. There was an interesting period where you could buy a plugin for a Flame and the same plugin for After Effects, and it would be 10% the price for After Effects for the exact same thing.
Wow.
But anyway, a Flame artist and the way Flames were set up back then, they've changed since then, but Flames were not designed to be animation tools. They were designed to be compositing tools, really easy to key and track and combine and color correct and mask and do things like that. And it was really fast. And because they were so expensive, you tended not to have very many of them. And because you didn't have very many of them, you tended to find the best artists you could for them. So the best artists happened to be working on Flame. And so the work coming out of the Flame always looked better. Right. Not because it was a Flame, but because it was a Flame artist who was like in demand, and boy, did they clean up. Some of them.
Oh, they got paid well.
Some of them would charge. I worked with one, he charged $1,500 a day, and he would get flown from LA to Boston to work on stuff.
Yeah, they were like these celebrities. You'd go in the room and like you had to like bow down to them practically, and you had to talk in like a hushed voice when they were working and stuff in the room. And it was like a big deal being in a Flame session back then.
Oh, absolutely. And they were magicians. I mean, to this day,
magic.
There are still Flame artists out there. And a good Flame artist who's been on that software for 20 years, I mean, they can do almost anything.
Yeah,
but at the
powerful.
time, there weren't animation tools in it the way there are in After Effects now, right?
Right. And this is actually kind of cool because I feel like this space that you're talking about, this created a space for people like Shinola and MK12, who we're going to look at next, to play around with this toy that nobody was really taking too seriously at the time and start to make some really awesome work on it and start to change people's minds about that kind of thing, you know? And,
yes.
And then with, let's talk about MK12 a little bit. I mean, these guys, they're... like we were saying, the work that they did at the start that got them really famous was all personal work in a certain sense. They were using After Effects and probably other software to create, design, and animate it a little bit for clients. But all the pieces, including this softcore sweater porn, I believe it's called as a typo, was... which we're just going to call sweater porn, I think, because it's a little bit easier to say. But,
yes.
This piece at the time, it just completely it was not done for a client. It just blew everybody away. It just sort of dropped on the scene like, here's this perfect enigma, right? Like, how did they make it? And, why did they make it? And it just seemed so revolutionary at the time, I think. Like, not only the techniques, but also just the idea of making something like this. And, like Joey was saying, nobody was using this tool for anything like this at the time. And these guys really came out and just started doing it.
Yeah, it's funny. If you ever, anyone listening, if you ever talk to motion designers of a certain age, let's say, I don't know, born after, or like born before 1988 or something like that, right? Then there's a kind of a nostalgia about this period. At least maybe I can't put words in Noel's mouth, but like
no, absolutely, you're 100% right.
Yeah,
this is when we were like all really excited about it, and also this was when it was starting, so there was this enthusiasm and energy, like we're saying,
Right.
And these guys really tapped into that a lot and helped push that forward a lot. I mean, I think like Shinola in some sense, they were also a collective, which it's hard to think about this now, but in the late 90s, everybody wanted to be in a collective. I'm not quite sure why. I was even in one. And the idea was like, you could have like 10 guys and you could all bring each other work, or 10 not guys, but 10 people, right. and you could all bring each other work, and you could work on, like, if one person got a job, we could all like work on this thing and do our little area of specialty. And, even if like I did a job, I could get you a job if I had too many jobs. And this idea of a collective was a really big thing back then. And,
that actually, it's interesting because so what I was going to say was that, a lot of the MK12 kind of golden year era stuff, the way you'd find out about it was really, there was one website that everyone went to. It was called MoGraph.net, and it's still there. And if you've never been over there, it's not very active these days, but all these posts are there from like, you can probably go find the post where MK12 posted 4D softcore sweater porn,
right.
and see the reactions. Like
I saw their work first at a film festival, at a theater, right? I mean, there was this thing called the Low Res Film Festival, which then the next year got renamed as Res Fest. I don't know if you remember Res Fest, but there was also Res Magazine. This is a 90s thing. I know I talked to Ben Raditz about this because they actually did he's the lead, one of the lead designers from MK12, and they actually did the opening sequence for the first Res Fest, which was kind of like this, I don't know, like it was weird experimental filmmakers and early CG people and just kind of like people who photographed lights with like long exposures or just like anything, you know, and they stuck it all together. And there's this magazine called Res, which at the time was like very influential. It was kind of the motionographer of its time. And they like, remember when like Waking Life came out and that was like digitally animated and like they had a big feature on that guy and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, this kind of 1990s. Yeah, this is definitely like a nostalgic period of time.
But the whole vibe at that point, because, you know, you got to remember at that point, there was no YouTube, there was no Grayscale Gorilla or School Motion, or, I mean, I think there was lynda.com, but it wasn't what it is now. And
there was
certainly,
Trish and Chris Meyer.
It was Trish and Chris Meyer, which you know, the mama papa of you know, people learning After Effects.
Totally.
However, the After Effects that they taught was the basic After Effects. It was how to use After Effects. You can't do what MK12 did taking that class, right? And so there on MoGraph.net, on this message board, there was like, it's crazy because you look back at the names on it and they're all running studios now and they're all winning motion awards and stuff. And at the time, everyone was on there trying to figure out how MK12 did that thing. How did Shiloh do that thing? How did Buck do that thing? How did PSYOP do that thing? And it was that 4D softcore sweater porn. When that came out, that was the first piece that I saw that I had absolutely no clue how they did it. At the time, I'd been using After Effects maybe for, I don't know, like 4 years. You know, you look at that Uncle Guns Blazing thing, right? Even if you don't know how they made the 3D animation in it and you don't know how they did the cell animation in it, you can see how they made it. They layered things, they'd move them, they'd turn transparency on and off.
That's true.
That MK12 thing, there are moments in there that to this day I'm not sure how they did it.
Exactly. It's very tricky.
Yeah, that 3D effect, I mean, that'd be hard to pull off today. Never mind, you know, 16 years ago. It's crazy.
Without a RAM preview.
Without a RAM, yeah. Yeah. Well, by that was 2001. So they had RAM preview then. They did have RAM preview then. They had 3D layers. They had cameras, which you could see used all over that piece. But there was no tutorial sites. Like, I remember there's a type effect in there where you see this piece of type and it gets animated on, kind of drawn on in this like strokey kind of way. And if you saw that piece now and you're like, how'd they do that? You'd get on YouTube and in 10 seconds, you'd know exactly how they did it. At the time, nobody had a clue how they did it. There's a School of Motion tutorial about how to do it now. Like there's one on every tutorial site. But at the time, it was like everyone was racking their brain. How did they do that? How did they do that? And then every once in a while, they'd hop on the message board and they'd tell you, and then everyone knew how to do it. And it was really this feeling of like, it's us against the app. We're trying to crack the code and no one's helping us. And that's why it's interesting you mentioned the collective thing being really popular, because it was almost like a kibbutz. It was
like sharing of knowledge kind of a thing.
Yeah. It was a very cool nostalgia.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Good
another thing about that piece, by the way, so when it came out, it's obviously very strange and weird and experimental, but got them on the map. Got them a lot of work.
Big time. And this is the thing, is like they successfully made personal work that brought them. I mean, then they did like James Bond title sequences a few years later after that. I don't know how, I might be conflating that timeline a little bit.
It wasn't that long after.
It wasn't that long. Yeah. I mean, I think also with MK12, and I don't know, tell me what you think about this, but I think they were the first American animation and motion graphics studio that brought like a fully American perspective and aesthetic to this. They weren't British. They didn't have that British grunge thing that was going on at the time with Tomato and Shinola and all those groups. They had a clean retro look that was based on like Americana from the past, right? And I think that really taps into something for all of, for people who are American, or maybe for everybody, I don't know, but like they really carved out that look for themselves, and they've stayed with that look. I mean, the whole time, basically. They really found their voice early on. And I think that's amazing.
There is something interesting about that, too, because, I mean, that retro aesthetic, it became their thing, and it wasn't just the look, it was also the sounds they would use.
Yes.
The typefaces, I mean, everything.
The kind of imagery.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the interesting things. So when I was, I think in my second year of working professionally, I was mostly just editing. I actually edited a spot for Pergo floors. I don't know if they're still around, but they're like these laminate floors you could buy. And the ad agency insisted that the end title card be animated by MK12. And so they did this really cool thing that for Pergo floors. And notice you don't see that on their website. It never ended up on there. And so this was one of the first things that made me realize, because I always wondered, I'd look at that softcore sweater porn thing and I'm like, that must have taken, at least 3-4 people like a month or two. I mean, it's just a ton of work to do it. Why the hell are they doing it? Like,
right.
I get that we're artists and I get that we like to make stuff, but like to make something that long, sustain that much effort for just to get it out there and no one understands it but you, it didn't make sense to me until that Pergo floor thing that they never put on their website, because I realized that it's the cool, weird, wacky personal projects that get you the high paying. That Pergo floors job, I don't know what the budget was. I mean, the editing budget was really high. So like I'm guarantee they did well on that.
Right.
And they wouldn't have gotten that without Ultra Love Ninja, which I think was the inspiration that the agency said, oh, we like this thing.
Right.
So so that's another lesson for everyone listening is you're going to be doing professional work at some point, and it's generally not going to be your sexiest, most fun, cool work. And clients want to see that stuff. So that's the stuff you have to do on your own time, or book yourself for 2 weeks to do something neat in order to get those boring jobs that pay you lots of money.
Yes. Oh, this is totally true. This is absolutely true, 100%. You have to make your own work, and you have to keep finding your own voice. I mean, especially if you consider yourself a designer or somebody that wants to create your own work, a director, essentially. Even if you're not an illustrator or some great designer, and you're not professionally going to kind of do that, I still think even if you're going to work in motion design, you still need to know a bunch of things about design. I mean, I think you have to have a general sense of placement and composition and color and those kind of things as well. But we're not all going to become MK12, but certainly it's something to reach for sure. And I guess some people listening to this class, they might be amazing designers and could take this animation knowledge and go on to do really, really well with it. So
yeah. And I think I want to repeat what you said earlier, which is you can save bad animation with good design, but not really the other way around. And the animation in this piece, in the sweater porn piece, I'm going to call it the sweater porn piece. It's not bad, but it's not smooth or good. It's not like you don't notice it. It's not like, oh wow, that's really good animation. Some of the pieces that we'll talk about in later episodes of this podcast have amazing animation in it. Like the movement is beautiful.
Yes.
Never mind what is moving. The movement's beautiful. But in this piece, that's not the case. But it's the design and the idea is so cool that it almost doesn't matter. In fact, it doesn't matter in this case.
Right.
And
although the movement's pretty unexpected, I will say. Like it kind of moves in ways that you weren't expecting, and I think that's part of the charm too. It's not necessarily like really smooth, but I think actually MK12 has the leg up over Shinola, for example, at this period of time, because not only they're all great designers, but I feel like MK12, they were good animators to begin with as well. Even with the limited tools, they knew how to push that animation forward. I mean, these 3D layers, I mean, how recently had they even put 3D layers into After Effects?
And then suddenly they're doing this cool version,
Yeah, I mean, they took that and they knew exactly what to do with it right away, which is, I mean, so they're not just great designers. I think they really are also amazing animators too. Yeah.
Well, the way I would describe their animation, I guess when I'm talking about animation, I'm talking about like the traditional idea of it where you're following certain principles and things move and they ease and they fall and they overlap and things, where you can literally take a dot and move it around in a way that makes you go, ooh, that's nice, right? That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is, that's a good word you used, unexpected. It's weird and it's cool and it's interesting. But it's kind of like what Uncle did with the guns blazing thing, or what Shinola did. Like, there wasn't easing and smooth animation, but it was kind of cool what they did with it.
Right. It almost gives it like a low frame rate look or something because it's so like chunky and linear.
What MK12 and to this day, I mean, they're still like masters of, is they are clever with the software. Really clever. Like The effect that I'm sure all the students are wondering how the hell they did it
Yes.
is that thing where images kind of extrude out in this
And then
weird
become
way
3D.
and then become 3D. And the only way that I could think to do that, I'm sure this is how they did it, is you take that image into a real 3D program. So they didn't just do that in After Effects. They did that in a 3D program. And they they pushed shapes through a texture that it was stuck to, so it made these weird things. Then they'd render out a frame of that, and then they'd use that as a 3D layer inside of After Effects, but then they'd seamlessly transition back into a 3D animation. And that kind of stuff, that's done all the time now, transitioning from 2D to 3D, After Effects to Cinema 4D. Back then, that was such a pain in the ass. And it was like, if you did that in your spot, it automatically elevated it to have 2D and 3D playing together. It was so hard. And now it's much easier. It's still not that easy, but back then it
really
was
expensive back then.
Yes, it was rocket science. And they just the way they used mats and effects, and they would just figure out ways to hack the software to do things no one had ever seen before.
Yeah, and, even that little animation at the end of the needle point, putting their logo on that pillow, actually at the time that looked really awesome. I think it looks a little bit jippy now, but now there's probably 100 tutorials about how to do the exact same thing. But at the time, they had to invent that. They had to figure out how to make that look. They had that idea, and then they had to sit there and fiddle with After Effects and make that happen somehow.
They had to fiddle with it, and they had absolutely nobody they could ask. There was no other person on earth that could help them.
That's true. They were the authorities.
They were the authorities. That was the amazing thing. And what I love about MK12 too is that probably put a lot of pressure on them after that came out and it blew up the way it did, and everyone and all the motion designers are looking at it, all the MoGraphers. And then they got to do the next one and the next one and the next one. And everything they do is great and weird, and the retro thing that became their calling card, man.
In fact, if you look on Vimeo, on the Vimeo page for this softcore sweater porn, all the comments are this was the piece that got me into MoGraph. There's starting 7 years ago, there's comments like that, and they go up to this day. I mean, we can't really stress. I mean, MK12 invented genres of motion graphics when they made pieces back then. They did this Macho Box, the Brazil, and they were the first people to do kinetic type piece, for example. That tradition is still going on from 15 years ago when they made that first piece. I mean, they were just way ahead of the curve, and I think they're just geniuses. I'm not quite sure how.
And one more thing I want to say about this piece too. So this piece, I mentioned an ad agency hired them to do a thing for Pergo Floor. So MK12 was not just MK12. There were other studios at the time doing this, but MK12 was one of the studios that started to legitimize After Effects as not just a toy. Yes. Because the truth was you couldn't animate, you could make 4D softcore sweater porn in a flame, but After Effects is a much better tool for it. And they discovered and almost helped invent this aesthetic. And you look at this now, and there's a lot of pieces of this that feel, like they could fit in an explainer video. I mean, a lot of it's experimental, but the vector shapes, some of the transitions, the type, the way things animate on and off, some of that stuff, you can see traces of it, in work today, but a flame, the way it worked, made it much harder to do these things. So flame artists didn't. And all of a sudden there was this aesthetic that you could do in After Effects that you couldn't do any other way. And it really helped push, us working class After Effects animators forward and got us more opportunities. There was this weird phase. It actually began this weird phase where I was an After Effects artist, I think not in 2001 when this came out, but probably in 2005. And probably up until about 2008 or 9, where that, clients thinking the flame or the more expensive software was the answer, that was still around. And there was this weird phase where I would animate stuff in After Effects and then give it to a flame artist to touch up, just so the company could say it was done on a flame.
Right. They needed to justify the money they spent on that huge box.
Wow, that's a whole nother podcast, my friend. I mean, this. I'm glad you picked this one to talk about, Noel, because this one is definitely historically important.
Yeah, it was a huge piece at the time, definitely a big bombshell. Really, all of their early stuff was. It was hard to actually limit it to one of their pieces. I mean, it just kind of came down to this one. But you should definitely check out everything that they've done if you've never heard of MK12.
Of course,
including the opening for our class here.
Woohoo! Boy.
All right, well, that's awesome. And those are 3 amazing pieces. I think that's going to really start this podcast out well to have talked about these. This is kind of the early experimental phase that we're talking about now. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to add into this, Joey?
Well, I think I'm excited to get into the next episode because, the capabilities of After Effects improve, the technology improves, computers get faster, all these things start to happen. And so you'll start to see the work gets a lot more polished.
Yes, exactly. It gets a lot better from here. Okay, that was awesome, right? I love all 3 of those pieces, and I think they've really aged pretty well. Maybe the Uncle Guns Blazing video, not quite as much, but the other 2 are total classics. Anyway, I hope you're inspired. This really transported me right back to those years. Before motion design was a thing, which is sort of hard to think about now, but, it was all just developing, and we didn't even have HD TV yet, and the idea of video on the web was kind of like science fiction and, nostalgia. Anyway, I think this is all really interesting, and as you'll see as we move forward that the industry is going to change a lot, and obviously the technology changes a lot, but also it's really cool to see the way people and studios start to approach motion design differently because of all that, and just the way things keep shifting around is really interesting. It doesn't all gel together quite yet. So next week we'll definitely be looking at an industry in transition as studios and individuals really, I think, begin to realize just what's going on here with this motion design stuff, right? So thanks for listening, and just remember, if you still think that stewed cranberries taste more like applesauce than prunes do, drop me a line.